Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Correll, and we've been doing this for a little over 5 years now. And this I'm talking about is having a weekly conversation about empowerment and access to it. I'm here most often with my empowerment comrade in arms, Jan Jeremias. And I'm really just want to say, in particular this week, there's so much going on in the world, and there are so many different subjects that are either intended or unintended to disempower people. You know, there's money behind disempowerment and there's money behind empowerment. But what you want is empowerment for empowerment's sake. You know, make that mean what you want to and what is applicable to your particular life and needs right at the moment. So I think with that, I like that we were just talking about science. You know, science and mathematics in particular to me, I was always wired for that, which is why it made it so easy for me to understand all of the design principles behind microcomputing, if you will. So in the early 1990s, when most people were trying to figure out what the cursor was and what to do when the C prompt started blinking at you, I had that same starting position, but within 2 or 3 months, with the right kind of, tutoring, I came along very quickly. And then when I actually started learning how to mechanically build PCs out of bits and pieces, what they were, how they worked, how to install and set them up, what were the funky little things that happened if you didn't do this, that, and the other thing. A guy that was training me owned another competing but not competing computer company. We were buying 15 computers from him a month to resell, and so he trained me to basically replace him and be able to do what he was doing on my own, which was really generous if you think about it. So he's the reason that I started off during the 1990s. Our little company built over 2,500 desktop and tower computers. So not a lot compared to many and most. However, we got our little logo out there in a lot of different places. So back to science, the whole scientific method, which is, to always question the data, right?
I think of it about, I've always thought about it as you learn something and you realize that to the best of your ability at that point, it is true. But at any moment, something might come along that disproves what you thought.
Interesting.
So it wasn't like I ever took it like, and I think that came out that for a lot, like that sort of attitude came over time to me. It was like, and just as you learn, as science goes on over years, you just realize that things you thought were true got disproved
Yes.
when they learned something else. And so I never looked at it as, this idea that, if the science was good, basically, if the data was what the data was, then you took it for what it was. And maybe some of what you thought was true is not, because either because there were limitations in whatever the experiment was or the experimental design was, or it wasn't true.
Yeah, the essential formula for science, if I can state it in terms that I understand, is to see something and have an understanding of what it is and be interested in what it can be. So the first thing to do is to start off with, if I were to do this with something that I think I'm familiar with and I think I understand, what do I predict the outcome will be? And that hypothesis is what helps make the design of the testing criteria, or actually the gain of understanding that can come from experimentation. Experimentation has to do with taking something that's more conceptual in nature and turning it into something that has utility. And if that can be done, it can also be monetized, or it can actually move ahead other people's thinking. And in the pure science that has no money attached and is not being paid for by large corporations, the pure science that's supposed to go on in universities around the world is basically about upgrading the body of human knowledge. But you and I both know there's this thing called the political background, which makes it difficult to make changes to what is widely accepted as you said earlier, true. What Having something be proved untrue in many cases is so much harder once it's been accepted and tested, peer reviewed, all that sort of thing. Once that's all occurred, the disapproval is very difficult sometimes. So, for example, the whole notion, we'll go back a ways, a few months and weeks and years ago, when people used to think that the world was flat. To say otherwise was blasphemous, because the notion was not scientific. It had more to do with ideology. It had more to do with dogma. And as a result of that, once something that we think we know, understand, can measure, can make changes to, is attached to ideas that are non-scientific, really difficult to break loose of that. So we can go through time and we can look at Galileo and Copernicus, and we can look at some of the major, even Newton and other people like that, with the things that they were saying and their observations and therefore their hypotheses, didn't go with the conventional wisdom before. Copernicus and Galileo especially paid heavily for their science. Um, and there are others that are going through that now, people that we've never heard of before. So the whole notion of the story is that the scientific method is something that every human being can use in their lives if you distill it down to just a formula. You know, you see something, you have an idea of how to improve it, you make a projection about what would change it to the better state, then you start to experiment by actually doing the thing. And then once it's complete, you measure the outcome without any judgment of it being good or bad, just what is it, right? And then use that information for the next round, and so on and so on and so on. And so this is how we can have simple little things like, I don't know, an analog computer that was made from television tubes, back in the 1940s and 50s, turned into a handheld phone that can do the sum of all computing that was available in your hand, the sum of all the computing that was available in the world in 1965. You're in your hand, okay? So that's comes from, how do we make it better? How do we make it more useful? How do we make it more utilitarian? And then how do we make it more profitable? The profit motive, I think, moves things ahead a lot faster, in my opinion, than the one that's just pure science for making the world a better place. Any thoughts on all of that? Because I just made that all up.
I mean, I think those kind of like notions of like Galileo and everything. I mean,
Looking for excitement? Chumba Casino is here. Play anytime, play anywhere. Play on the train, play at the store, play at home, play when you're bored. Play today for your chance to win and get daily bonuses when you log in. So what are you waiting for? Don't delay. Chumba Casino is free to play.
Experience social gameplay like never before. Go to Chumba Casino right now to play hundreds of games, including online slots, bingo, Slingo, and more. Live the Chumba life at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
personally, yes, obviously I've read about them, but not in many years. I look to like more practical things of, let's say nutrition and health and everything, where things they thought were true and they kind of said were absolute, all of a sudden are not as absolute as they claimed to begin with. And that's stuff I can relate to, because that's stuff that, like, I guess on a daily basis may apply to me.
Yes.
So, and if anybody's like, like the different attitudes on fats, and for a long time everything like fat was bad, and then realizing that, well, certain fats are bad and other fats you really need, or or other parts of like nutrition and health, which I think we're very, which sometimes are given as such absolutes that it, now things that are absolute make me question, cause me to kind of pause and kind of with a puzzle. If I had like a little puzzled look above my head, I'd be like, are you sure that that's all bad? Kind of attitude. So I think I look at it like that. And then I love what you shared though about like you do an experiment and you figure out whether it works or it doesn't work, and you measure it, because I think that that's the way I've always looked at my health. It's like I make a change and I see how I feel, and then I'm like, okay, well, how do I feel based on that change? And some of that is subjective and some of it is not subjective.
Yeah, and I think what you're highlighting is there's a thrownness to evaluating the value and or whether you like the outcome. If it turns out that you do the same thing and the same thing results like 9 out of 10 times in a row, many people will look at this and say, well, no, this process has to be skewed because this does not make sense. When, if you think of it from the standpoint of somebody who doesn't know what the outcome ought to be, makes perfect sense. This is what happens when I do this 9 out of 10 times. It's only that situation where you're kind of attached to a previous idea. And we see this in life a lot, where you come into a situation, there's a group of people and they're working on something diligently. And then someone actually says, I'm not quite sure what you guys think you're doing, but this looks like it has absolutely nothing to do with why you invited me here. Perhaps we could stop and take a look at it and see if it makes any sense going forward. And oftentimes, if you ask people to try to explain why they're doing something that they don't understand, you're liable to make them mad, more than anything else. You're liable to just pee them off, and we see that in life too, but that's where the scientific method per se has given way to belief systems, expectations, and what people feel like gets rewarded, you know?
Well, I mean, I was going to say a lot of it is based on reward. And because I remember, like, having particular hypotheses or thoughts as to, like, ideas of what would, based on, not like, it was all based on information that we knew, or like, or was supposed, let's say, supposedly true already. So you have, like, when you come up with a design, it's based on previous facts which you have accumulated. I mean,
Right.
it's based on knowledge. And so you have an idea based on the knowledge you have of what the expected outcome might be and the possible results and what you would like to happen.
Right.
Oh, okay, this would be really cool because this would explain the mechanism if it goes like this. And then all of a sudden it doesn't, or it doesn't work. And you're like, part of you is like, okay, what does that mean? Is that, like I said, the experimental design? Is it happened to be like, just something that happened on that day, some miscalibration, something, not even the, because it's so nuanced? Or is it that like everything we thought or what we were basing it on is not true, or certain facts about that are not really correct, or, and then you have to go back. But so much of it is based on.
Bubba Wallace here from 2311 Racing. Funny thing about being fast, you end up waiting a lot. First to show up, first in line, then just waiting. Me, I rev up Chumba Casino. With over 200 social casino games, no slow lanes here. Why sit around when you can spin? I'm already racing. Your turn. Play for free at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
On the financial gain, and it's not financial gain in like I think of financial gain. I mean, it's based on, in the science world, if you're in academia, it's based on the grant funding and who's getting funded and where the grant money is coming from and all those different things. And because basically people need to work and have jobs. And so, how are scientists paid? They're paid based on grants, so I think that all of a sudden you have this whole, there is that pressure, for example, that you should, that it should go a certain way.
So I think that's a tip off. Like you said before, you should become suspicious when a so-called scientific process is not following a scientific process. Because there literally is no other reason, to monkey with potential outcome other than there's a cost or a consequence to not having the outcome come out the way you want it to. You're not open-minded. You're not asking a question any longer. You're producing a result for somebody in order to get another reward, as we started this conversation.
Yes, but I think that I think, and I'm kind of nuancing what I say because I feel like I think some of that is a product. Like, I think a lot of that is a product of the system.
Right.
The fact that you have, people with, let's say, certain agendas approving, let's say, grant money or on grant review boards, or, funding, and so there's, we're dealing with human beings, so in all their beauty, but also in all their, in all their biases too. So I think that, I don't know that many people that, I think it's just human nature. Like you get it, like you said, you get attached to a particular outcome and the way you think it's supposed to work. And that's what you kind of, and people base their whole, and I'm not saying this is wrong because, I think that they've learned a lot, but people base their whole career on on one thing.
Exactly right. You know, the mathematical formula that can't be solved. You know, when everybody agrees that something can't be solved, and they were talking about for years and years and years the proof of the Pythagorean theorem being done with algebra for, I don't know, hundreds of years, has never been able to be done. But we know of two young ladies in New Orleans going to a Catholic high school that managed to pull it off in a semester. You know, it's like, huh? You know, and they came at it two different solutions completely. And that's kind of like, once somebody has done that, I bet you there's many people who have found other ways to do it since. Once we stopped telling them they couldn't do it.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that, again, it's when a lot of times when you become so, well, we always talk about this, when you become so attached to something, there's no space for anything novel to come in, no matter what aspect of your life you're dealing with.
Right.
You know, if you get so trapped in a particular way of thinking or mode, and we're all guilty of this in one or more aspects of our lives, then all of a sudden there's no give or flexibility at all. And there's no options then. And science is no different.
Right. Yeah, boy, especially that science that invalidates what people have held to be true for 100 years. But here we are. I remember when I was a kid, I don't know, I think of under 20 as being a kid. But when I was going to high school and that sort of thing, I remember in my science class, our teacher basically saying the body of knowledge for all humankind is doubling every 50 years. Okay. And then when I was in college, I asked the question again, and we went and researched it as well as we could. We didn't have an internet in those days, but they were then saying that the body of knowledge was doubling at that point every 20 years. This is only 4 or 5 years later. And then in the 90s, when I started, you know, servicing different schools, because we had a whole lot of clients that were all part of the Connecticut, private school association, asked it again, and it said the body of knowledge now is doubling every 3 years. So that was 94, 95-ish. And now it's doubling multiple times a year. And the reason for that is that there's knowledge that's being gained that is now AI that no human being can either understand or experience. The knowledge being generated is at such a warp speed that it is no longer a useful measurement of anything. That we're doubling knowledge over a period of time has absolutely no import whatsoever any longer. It's why do we want to increase that? We don't. It's happening on its own.
I mean, I think that also is why we are dealing with an immense amount of anxiety and just angst, because things are changing so quickly. There
Yes.
is no ability to kind of say, okay, I'm going to just pause for a second and breathe and kind of absorb whatever this is. Because you know, things are changing so drastically, so quickly that you can pause. But I think the tendency is like, oh, what am I missing if I pause? Like, what's gonna, you know, all of a sudden, what's going to be disproved, or what's going to come out that I don't know about, or whatever. And I'm not saying that that is bad, I mean, or good. I'm just
Right.
saying that I think there's this tendency of like we can't we can't slow down because things are changing so fast. And I think we see it every day, like I look at, just, I don't know, the way you navigate everything.
Yeah, I find it interesting what you're saying. Um, I think it also is a pretty good pointer in terms of are most people feeling more anxious, more stress, less well-being as a rule? I don't know, but it seems like we're hearing that from a lot more people than we were a while ago, right? I mean, certainly 10, 15 years ago, I didn't find as many people that were concerned about their futures as I do right now.
I think that's true. And I also think, I always think physically because that's where I go to first. But I think that if you cross the board, I think that feeling of change and unpredictability, and I think that kind of got accelerated with the fear with COVID, was that fear of the unknown of like, that was kind of dramatically kind of um like infused into society and all the different aspects of life.
Right.
So I think that that whole idea of change is hard for people anyway. And I think that it's just got to be magnified in this whole idea that everything is changing so quickly all the time is very hard for people in general. And I think it's gotten even more so. Um, and I think that's why people say, I wish we could go back, like those types of comments.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Right.
Because
remember when we were unplugged?
yeah, or just I wish we could go back to when simpler times or when things were easier. And I'm not saying that I totally because I agree. I mean, I'd much rather talk to a person when I pick up the phone to call like a company or a bank or something than a machine. Much rather talk to a person.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I totally understand that sometimes, when you've been rerouted like 100 times through 100 prompts and you're like, I swear to you, this would take me 5 seconds. I have one short question. And I'm sure a person could answer this in about, a fraction of the time that this is taking me at the moment. So I get that. But I do think that there's this whole element of things are moving so fast. And that's the best word I can use.
Yeah.
That it's hard to keep up.
Interesting. And what if you don't have to?
I mean, yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, what would happen if we stopped?
Have you ever seen Tron, the movie Tron?
Years ago, not recent. I don't even know if I remember it. I mean, I think I saw it a long time ago.
There was a remake that came out, I want to say 2013, they redid it again. And upgraded some things and made some things a little bit different. But the movie Tron had to do with a culture where they anthropomorphized all of these different functions in a computer. The CPU, the data, the buses, all of the way that electrons get moved around in order to create a program or execute a program. And in the end, without giving away the whole plot, I'm going to actually change it a little bit so it's not exactly what happens, but in the end, the person who devised this mega company, a billionaire who figured out a way to get inside and to change themselves into a program so that they could operate inside of this mega computer, he goes there to hide. He figures out how to take himself off grid inside of the computer programs, and he lives there without anybody really knowing it for like 20 years, which is more than a lifetime, for obviously for all the components of a software program. I think the neat part of it was, the moral that I'm coming away with is sometimes you got to step out of the way. If there's a 2x4 coming at your head, move aside.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about it, bacteria and viruses do the same thing. They are like, okay, I'm just going to hang out in these cells right here. I'm very happy. I don't have to, I don't have to do a whole lot. And eventually, maybe an environment, I can do something, maybe the environment becomes inhospitable.
Right.
And I all of a sudden change myself. So now I whatever, so that I can survive. But they do the same thing. They hang out and they're like, okay, I'll just hang out here. This is kind of cool. I don't really need to do much.
Yeah, by the way, I'm just a germ, so I can't fight back, really. There's not much I can do. I can get in and I can do my thing, and without really realizing it, I can, I can mess things up, but I'm not trying to. Not a bad germ.
Well, I was having this conversation with somebody, I don't know, the other day. We were talking about the fact that, a virus or a bacteria, their main goal is to survive. And if they make a host sick, then that threatens their survival.
It's true.
So, that's their whole point in existence, is like, okay, well, I just want to be able to survive. So they're like, if they do something to the host or to whatever, being they inhabit, doesn't do them a whole lot of good if that host doesn't survive.
Spot on. And that's one of the things that we actually saw in COVID, that each round of mutations took it less and less away from being a deadly virus,
Because it makes no sense, and the body is pretty, and it's pretty ingenious. They actually are. That's why I always loved infectious disease, my background, because it was like kind of cool to me that they were so brilliant, and the fact that that was they were like, okay, I just want to survive this, and it's actually the immune system and our reaction to it that causes illness. So.
Yeah, when it all comes down to it, there are levels of understanding of science as well. And some people who think they understand science actually don't. And some people who say they understand science, clearly they don't. But there are other people who understand science and silence, and they've got the power.
It reminds me of like, when you're looking at the mechanism of something, and this might sound like, it's like, and I'll use this two examples. So if you are looking to work with a dog or an animal, let's say, you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, I'm going to think like a dog. Like, what does a dog feel or think in this situation? What's it reacting to? And maybe, yes, that's your projection on what it is, but it's kind of like, okay, I've got to put myself in their place kind of attitude. Well, bacteria or a virus is no different. You're kind of like, what? Like, if I'm this virus, like, what am I going to do And I mean, that's why it's also because they bind to receptors that we need to have function every day. They don't create new things to bind to. They're like,
Right.
oh, okay, the body has like a trillion copies of this one receptor. It's on every cell. Oh my gosh, like why not figure out how I can bind to that? You know, because that makes so much sense. Like, why should I like, I'm not going to choose a receptor that's only on one type of cell because that really, then I need to make sure I have access to those specific cells. You know?
And it's even stranger than that because they can only do that by changing enzymes, and affecting something that happens at a molecular level with positive and negative charges and all that sort of stuff. So they're too damn smart for themselves, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. But they are in some ways, like I say, intriguing. And
Yeah.
so,
I remember a scientist once describing to me what a chimera was, and not a chimera like the um, mythological sense, but a chimera being this, what he called an exquisite, it shouldn't exist, but it does, life form that does all these different things that have never been packaged together before. And so mythological chimera was a lion head and had wings and eagle claws and all that sort of thing or whatever it was, but it was supposed to be almost an undefeatable beast, but for a human being. And that the enigma of some of these new viruses, um, it's right there because especially ones that we see that affect us at a community level or at a worldwide level, when we get to the point where it's either a pandemic or an epidemic, um, we're usually treating symptoms and don't have time to study what the cause is, if you will. There's certainly not enough effort that goes into the causation.
no, absolutely. I think that especially in our current culture, where I mean, because usually, it's the symptoms that obviously I'm not belittling this. It's the symptoms that are causing the problem, and people do need symptom relief. You know, if if you have an upper respiratory virus and you can't breathe, that's your primary goal. Is you want to help someone breathe, but to me, you can't forget about the other half, which is how does this work? How does the virus work? What is it actually doing? What cells? What's involved? And it can't be all on one side, and it can't be like, oh yes, I loved learning, but I mean, it can't all be that, and then you have people that are like dying and suffering, or any being that's dying or suffering. But you also can't have it all, so that the only thing you looked at is symptom relief, and then that's all. That doesn't solve anything.
Right.
And most of the time, a lot of times that's short lived. The symptom relief, I find anyway.
Yeah, that's another whole story. That symptom relief part is, um, how to say it. In some cases, the need to self-medicate exceeds all the other needs for people, and we're seeing it more and more in our culture right now. So I'm wondering, with that in mind, what would be the scientific process to heal? What would the scientific process look like to allow people the downtime that everyone needs to reprocess, to regroup, to become stronger? There are a lot of people who do not sleep every night.
Oh, I know.
I'm hearing more and more about it, and it's also kind of an infliction or an affliction that is inflicted upon elderly people at times too. Having to get up multiple times over the night, or not being able to sleep at all, or sleeping for a little while and waking up and not being able to go back to sleep. These are kind of the neat things that we can share solutions with each other. Like we can home remedies, like I like to call them, where like what works at your house and what do you do about this when it happens? Those are some very supportive things. And if nothing more, they at least, um, they at least validate that something is happening, and it's real, A, and B, that it's more than one person's affected by it. But when we look at science and we look at people's relationship with science, saying the words sometimes is enough to make large groups of people's eyes glaze over. Like what's going to get said now is going to be so far above my head, I just have no interest of even sticking around and listening to it. And though they may be present physically, their mind is probably skiing in the Alps or something.
No, absolutely. Like I just remember because I've been to so many different types of conferences through the years, from like essential oil meetings to like science conferences from when I was in research and everything. And it's so interesting as the messages that would go across from like friends when the science would come up, like all my friends who were really into it, we'd all be like, isn't this the coolest thing? And then all our friends who would be like, okay, they just lost me, or I'm like, my eyes just, I just got glazed over, and literally like out to lunch kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, and some of that has to do with years of like, basically, depending on your schooling and what, and science teachers and all that kind of stuff. And then also the ability of the speaker to speak to varying populations of people with different backgrounds. That's some of it too. But yeah, it always makes me smile. They're always like, you must be loving this. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm loving every second of it. The more like, the more biochemistry and the more chemicals and, cells that come in, the more like, I'm like, oh, I love this. Because I think that I look at it as miraculous. Like it seems like a very miraculous thing to me. So I think that's what I'm always thinking about. Like, this is pretty amazing kind of attitude. Like that idea, you talk about wonderment, I think about that, But I do think you're right, where like there are certain, and I'm not talking drastic, like when I mean drastic, like, but there are certain things that occur over time that I think are very debilitating, which like, lack of sleep.
Yep.
Or digestive issues where, and people either ignoring or just feeling like there's nothing I can do about it. And over-the-counter things are very easy to come by and very easy to obtain and tend to be very fast acting. So like, oh, okay, well, or sometimes can be much faster acting, depends.
Well, the thing I love is when it turns out an old home remedy has a scientific basis.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I get so excited.
Like chicken soup.
Yeah, or the fact that, clove oil for like tooth pain or dental problems, which has been used like, when we had, my grandmother would say, oh, go get a clove and put it in your mouth. Like, chew on a clove.
Numb it right up for you.
Numb it right up for you, and that's been around. Like, I do too. I love when those home remedies or when those things, like, you're like, there was a wisdom of, and that just happened, and it was passed down, from families to families, or, it's just kind of the whole idea of like herb gardens which were not only for flavoring, but what they called medicine gardens.
Yep.
Like, oh, we could grow this in our backyard. It's really good for whatever.
Nothing better than that. You know how to access it, you know how it works, and you know what to do to have more of it in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So while we're thinking about science and the monkeying with science and the value of science, there's also a pretty neat manifestation of communication that goes on around the whole subject. The communicating on things that need to happen, why they need to happen, habits, policies, past practices, all of those sort of things, they imply that there's a scientific reason that they're in place in the first place. So the status quo in 1960 was a lot more difficult to move than it is in 2025. In 1960, people wouldn't even listen to somebody who says we need to do things different than we're doing with them. In 2025, 50 to 70% of the people already agree there's something wrong around here, so we ought to do something about it. More open to suggestions, more open to following people who seem to have at least a little something on the ball. And with having a diversity of ideas and different ways to resolve issues, if you will, the normalizing of traditions, I think, has kind of gone by the wayside. We show up, we wake up into a world that we're not quite sure how it's going to behave today, and try to bring our A game every single day, which also means that we're on high alert, for fight or flight. And that is so wearisome after a while.
Oh, it's very exhausting. It's very, very exhausting. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is exhausting so I think we talked about unplugging. So I think as much as things move and people are open, there's also an overwhelming amount of information. Too much for most people to handle. To the in the amounts they're receiving it.
Yes.
So whether it be news, news or something else, there is this I've used this example on the show before. My father was very well informed I think for a time. I mean, he was an avid reader and everything, but he read the newspaper in the morning before he went to work. At work, you didn't listen all day. You just didn't. I mean, he was working. You didn't, there were no phones, kind of thing. I mean, just, you worked all day. Then when you came home, and he either watched the 5 o'clock news when he got home, or he watched the 10 or 11 o'clock news, but he watched the news. And then otherwise you didn't hear about news all day.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't this 24-hour bombardment of information about a myriad of topics. So I'm not only talking about news. I mean, entertainment and sports and, and financial news and, and political news. Like, it is so information overloaded that I find that that's what happens. Like, I speak to people and people are like, I'm too full. That's the action is I'm too full right now. I really can't handle much more.
Yes.
And that's where I feel like and that I'm not quite, yes, you can unplug, you can, but I don't know. I feel like something else has to happen and besides for that, like there has to be something almost more um, to turn down the volume.
Absolutely. So, if we were going to encapsulate, summarize, and put a bow on our conversation for this week, what would that look like to you?
Oh goodness. I don't know. She covered a lot of various. I mean, I like asking questions. So I guess like I think about it and I think to myself, like people to just even look at the word science. Like, how do they relate to it? What do they think about it? What do they think it is? Um, are they curious about the world and how it works? Like that's what I look at science. Science is like a curiosity about how things work.
Yes. I like that a lot.
And that could be like, if you want to take it into your life, like, what is the science behind my, like, well, how does this relationship work? What is the science behind this relationship that I have with someone?
Yes.
And that's not talking about like what molecules could be, what molecules are exchanged, but that's not really, in that case, that might not be what the person is thinking about, but yeah, how do things work?
Yeah, let's also maybe drop back every once in a while and say, it may be serious as hell, but not necessarily very important. So maybe if there's a situation you're in that isn't working for you and you think that you're working the answer, it might not be the answer that's at fault. You might want to ask yourself, what would be a better question for what I'm going through right now? And if you can constantly be like upgrading your question so that it's getting closer to bringing utility into your life and bringing you some freedom, and those minutes of clarity where your mind is empty to the threat, if you will, or to the soup of there's something wrong around here. I think your the quality of your thinking and the answers that you use to kind of daisy chain or monkey bar to your next good question, they're all valuable. Um, I would just say do yourself a favor and don't get stuck on any one answer for too long when it clearly isn't working for you.
I would have to like make one comment about that though.
I hope so.
Yeah, because I think that when people do make change, and I'm specifically thinking about, let's say, health, like let's say people don't give it enough time.
Yep.
I think that's very, very, very obvious to me. People don't give it enough time to see whether it actually would work. The body is fast and the cells reproduce, but the body is not that fast, especially when it's introduced to something new. And so it's kind of like it takes a while for the body to say, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? This is new. Like, how do I use it? And then by the time you feel the effects, because we're kind of slow on the uptake, so to speak, like
We're only human.
We're only human. We're slow on the uptake. So we sit there, we make a change, and then we're like, after a day, we're like, well, I don't feel anything. And so it's one thing to say, okay, this isn't working, or ask a different question.
Yes.
And I love that. But it's also very valuable to sit here and give it a little time to see whether it will work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate and thank you for that. And I completely agree with that last thought. And with that said, I would like to reach out to everybody who's listening to the sound of my voice right now, there are people in your lives that need to hear from you. They need to know that they're important, and they need to know that because they're in your life works. Just knowing that they're out there makes a huge difference. And if this is hard for you to wrap your head around, I want you to think about somebody who's no longer here and how much of a difference it made to you when you knew they were, and how much of a difference it makes to you now knowing that they're not here. I think if people can see their value through your eyes at least one time a week or a month, might make their day a little bit better. It might make their choices in life a little bit easier and stronger, but I don't know. I'm only asking you to participate in this experiment, and let's see if one at a time we can make the world a better place. Thank you so much, my wonderful friend Jan.
Oh, thank you, Bill.
It's my pleasure. We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and that's our time for today, ladies and gentlemen. Bless you all and have the best lives, and then come back and tell us all about it.
Have a good day and a good week.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.